Hi, thanks for visiting Bible Mountain. This is the 12th lesson in a series of lessons on the book of Jude. In this lesson, I'm going to do an exposition of verse 9. The first four verses of Jude are the introduction, in which Jude tells us why he wrote the book of Jude. Jude recognized that people had crept into the church who were turning the grace of God into sensuality, and they were denying Jesus. In verses 5 through 7, Jude reminded us that Jesus is also a judge. That was one of the things he did to refute those who were turning the grace of God into sensuality. Verses 8 through 16 is where Jude further described the problem that he was writing about. In this lesson, we're looking at verse 9, which is the second verse of this section. I'm going to start by reading verses 3 and 4, which reminds us why this was written, and then we'll skip to verses 8 and 9. Jude 3. Beloveds, making every effort to write to you about our common salvation, I felt the necessity to write to you, urging you to contend for the faith which has been delivered over once for all to the saints. For certain people crept in secretly, those who were long ago designated into this judgment, ungodly people, turning the grace of our God into sensuality and denying our only Master and Lord Jesus Christ. Now we'll jump to verse 8, which is where Jude began to further describe these people who had crept into the church. Jude 8. Nevertheless, likewise also these men, dreaming, indeed are defiling flesh, rejecting authority, and blaspheming majesties. In the previous lesson, I talked in depth about this verse, and I mentioned that if you narrow this down to the essential words of the sentence, you have these men are defiling flesh, rejecting authority, and blaspheming majesties. This is a description of the people who had crept into the church. The last thing that Jude mentioned is that these men were blaspheming majesties. Now let's look at verse 9. But Michael, the archangel, when arguing with the devil, was disputing about the body of Moses. He did not dare to pronounce an abusive judgment. Rather, he said, "The Lord rebuke you." Now the first word of this verse is but. The word but draws a contrast. I'll talk about that more in a minute. Then the next several lines tell us about Michael the archangel. Apparently there was a point in time when he was arguing with the devil about the body of Moses, but Michael, even though he was an archangel, he did not dare to pronounce an abusive judgment against the devil. Then we have the word rather. The word rather draws a contrast between what Michael the archangel did not do and what he did do. And what he did do was this. Michael the archangel said to the devil, "The Lord rebuke you." So instead of Michael the archangel rebuking the devil himself, he relied on the authority of the Lord to rebuke the devil. Let's go back and take a closer look at all this. Again, the first word is the word but. That draws a contrast between verse 9 and what came before verse 9. What came before verse 9 is verse 8, where Jude had mentioned that these men were blaspheming majesties. Now, in the context of this, we see that blaspheming majesties is something that we should not do. And one of the ways Jude illustrated that was to point out that even Michael the archangel did not do that. And that's essentially what verse 9 is about. Again, we see this is specifically about Michael the archangel. So let's take a look at some verses about Michael. This is from Daniel 10, verse 13. But the prince of the kingdom of Persia was withstanding me for 21 days. Then behold, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, for I had been left there with the kings of Persia. So we see here a reference to Michael. Later in Daniel, we see this. However, I will tell you what is inscribed in the writing of truth. Yet there is no one who stands firmly with me against these forces except Michael, your prince. And then in Daniel 12, verse 1, we see this. Now at that time, Michael, the great prince, who stands guard over the sons of your people, will arise. And there will be a time of distress such as never occurred since there was a nation until that time. And at that time, your people, everyone who is found written in the book, will be rescued. And then we see this in Revelation 12, verse 7. And there was war in heaven, Michael and his angels waging war with the dragon. The dragon and his angels waged war. So we see multiple references throughout the Bible to Michael the archangel. And they indicate to us that Michael is a significant entity. Now, if Michael the archangel did not dare to pronounce an abusive judgment against the devil, that's a pretty good indication to you and I that we, nor any other human, should not dare to pronounce an abusive judgment against the devil either. So we go to the next line. It tells us that Michael the archangel was arguing with the devil, and they were disputing about the body of Moses. I'm not aware of any other verse in the Bible that gives us any information about this. But then it tells us very clearly that Michael the archangel, even though he was an archangel, even though he was a very significant entity in heaven, he did not dare to pronounce an abusive judgment against the devil. And think about that phrase, did not dare. That is a very strong statement of what Michael the archangel did not do. And again, rebuking the devil, bringing an abusive judgment against the devil is something that Michael the archangel was not willing to do. He did not dare to do it. And that's a lesson to you and I that we should not even think about doing that either. And then we have the word rather. And as I said before, that draws a contrast between what came before the word rather and what came after it. Before the word rather, we are told that Michael the archangel did not dare to pronounce an abusive judgment against the devil. After the word rather, we see that instead, Michael the archangel said, "The Lord rebuke you." Michael the archangel, even though he was a significant entity in heaven, gave way to the Lord and allowed the Lord to rebuke the devil instead of doing it himself. As I mentioned earlier, the reason verse 9 is in the book of Jude is to further illustrate what we see in verse 8. Jude made it clear in verse 8 that it is wrong to be blaspheming majesties. And the way he illustrated that in verse 9 was by pointing out that Michael the archangel did not even do that. So let's review what we have. In Jude 4, Jude told us that certain people had crept in secretly. They were turning the grace of God into sensuality and denying our only Master and Lord Jesus Christ. In verse 8, Jude wrote that those men were defiling flesh, rejecting authority, and blaspheming majesties. And then in verse 9, Jude started off with the word "but" to point out that Michael the archangel did not dare to pronounce an abusive judgment against the devil. Also keep in mind that in verse 3, Jude wrote, urging us to contend for the faith. It's very important that you and I contend for the faith, fight for the truth, and stand up for the truth. Let me close by urging us to be cautious in how we think about Satan, talk about Satan, or even talk to Satan. At various times in my life, different people have mentioned things about they feel like they were persecuted by Satan. There have been other times where I've heard stories from people claiming that they have witnessed or seen people who were demon-possessed and they have dealt with that in a certain way. And I'm not going to get into whether or not any of that is true. I would simply say that based on Jude 9, we should be very careful how we think about Satan, how we talk about Satan, or even interact with Satan. If indeed we are in a scenario where we think we are dealing with a demon-possessed person, we need to be very careful with that. Satan and his demons are very powerful. They are more powerful than you and me. And again, if Michael the archangel did not dare to pronounce an abusive judgment against the devil, that is a warning to us that we should be very careful about how we talk to Satan. You and I should not dare to pronounce an abusive judgment against the devil either, because the devil is very powerful. And we should take a lesson from Michael the archangel and be sure that if we are in a scenario like that, that we stand back and let the Lord take control of that situation, because he's the only one that has the power to control Satan. Once again, thanks for visiting Bible Mountain. If you have already joined my email list, thank you, and please forward this to someone else who would benefit from visiting Bible Mountain. If you have not joined my email list yet, please do so now. My email list is free. In order to join, go to BibleMountain.com, click on email, and that will take you to a web page where you can sign up. Your email address will not be sold nor given away. Once again, thank you for visiting Bible Mountain.